We'll start looking a lot more at the graph that we see within macroeconomics in a later unit, but I want to introduce some ideas now because I think it'll help make sense of some of the things we talk about throughout 4.2. So if we think back to the supply and demand model we had in microeconomics, if you remember, we had along our x-axis, we had quantity, just the amount of a certain product. Along our y-axis, we had the price of that product. What is the selling price in dollars for that single product? We had the demand, which is the total amount of that product that was wanted at every price. And the supply was the total amount of that product made available at every price. And then that point where they intersected was our equilibrium. So maybe for this product, we see that the average price, this equilibrium price was $10 at a quantity of 1,000. And now that's for a single product because we said micro deals with things on a smaller scale, like an individual product. Now we're going to see a supply and demand model when it comes to macroeconomics, and it's going to look slightly different, but there's going to be a lot of similarities. Because in microeconomics, along our x-axis, we had quantity, and we're not just talking about the quantity of a single product, we're talking about the quantity of all products. Remember, macro is big economy, the aggregate or the total economy. So when we look at that x-axis, we're going to have our quantity, but our quantity is going to be measured in GDP. We're going to look at the dollar amount of all goods and services being supplied because not all goods and services are created equal. You know, if I say that I produce 10 products, well, if I produce 10 pencils or if I produce 10 airplanes, those are two drastically different things in terms of the value of those products. So that's why we measure the total quantity or the total amount of what we produce in the dollar value of those goods. Now, instead of price, since pencils and airplanes have very different prices, we're not going to measure on our y-axis. We're not going to have like from anywhere from 10 cents up to, $1 billion. We're going to instead have something we call the price level, which is like an index, or what we do is we kind of take the average level of prices within the economy. We'll have our aggregate demand, which is the total amount of all goods and services demanded, the aggregate supply, which is the total dollar amount of all goods and services supplied, and then we'll have an equilibrium. But that equilibrium is going to be a lot bigger, right? Like for the quantity, we're going to have $19.6 trillion because that was the total amount of goods and services demanded and supplied in the United States economy. And we'll have a price level. Now, when we want to look at this price level, you see there it says 255. Well, what exactly does that mean? Well, that's what I want to get into today because price levels are indexes that help us understand what the average level of prices are within our economy. So whenever we use a price level, whenever we look at this average level of prices, what we want to end up using is what we call a price index. Now, I just want you to know a price index as we look at these, just like that said 255. It didn't say $255. It didn't say 255%. It's just a number. It's just an index, right? And what we do is we have these price levels that tell us what is the average level of prices within our economy. But we know that over time, prices change. Prices fluctuate year to year. You might be getting to an age now where you can look back and think about things that were a lot cheaper when you were younger versus where it is now, right? And we call this change of prices from year to year. We call this increase in those prices. We call it inflation, right? Just like a balloon, it gets bigger, it inflates. When prices get bigger, they inflate, right? It's a general increase in price level. Now, less frequently, we see deflation, a general decrease in price levels. Sometimes prices will drop on average. That doesn't happen all that often, and we'll talk later on about when specifically that does occur. So what price indexes exactly do we use in order to measure whether prices are going up or going down? Well, there's a couple major ones that are used in the United States. One's known as the Consumer Price Index. One's known as the GDP deflator or the implicit deflator, it's sometimes referred to as, and also the Producer Price Index. Now, I want to focus in on these two as we go throughout 4.2, talking about what is the difference between Consumer Price Index and the GDP deflator.